Hey, what up writers? I'm Violet, a writer and aspiring YA author, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the writing craft book, The Magic Words, Writing Great Books for Children and Young Adults by Cheryl Klein. I found out about this book through the Let's Talk Craft book club run by Laura Wright. I'll link it down below, also the live chat that was had about this book, and that's why I picked it up, because I wanted to have it read by that live chat. If you watch my vlogs, you saw me kind of going through this. It is a big book, but I thought because I do write young adult and I read young adult, I thought it was a good one for me to read since I love craft books. And normally before I do these reviews, I like to sit on it and think about how the book kind of sat with me, the information. Like with Story Genius, while reading it, right when I finished it, I was like, oh, I don't like it, like it had a bad taste in my mouth, but it was so useful and relevant to me afterwards. And this, while I enjoyed it while reading it, albeit it was kind of a longer read because it's a thick book, not so much that the stuff really has stayed with me. But what's unique about this book is Cheryl Klein is actually an editor, so it's kind of an editor's perspective about writing, which I found really kind of interesting, some of the tidbits in there regarding that. But it is really thick and there is a lot of information in here, so it's kind of hard to pinpoint some of the things for a review because there is just so much going on here. But a lot of this stuff is almost more general advice, things maybe I already knew or was already aware of. It's always good to have, you know, your ideas sort of validated in that way, especially from an industry professional. And I've kind of come around to think writing a book kind of about middle grade and young adult is difficult, specifically with young adult, because it has been kind of in flux. I feel like it's sort of a newer category that has changed so much and is still kind of ever evolving. So it's kind of hard to say what the norm is on young adult because it's changing, you know, it gets pushed more towards new adult. It gets, you know, there's so much conversation around this category. I find it very divisive for both writers and readers alike. So it's kind of a hard topic to cover, whereas I feel some of the information pertaining to YA in here might be already outdated, or if not, would be outdated soon, just because it's so ever changing. But that being said, some of the advice was very general writing advice where I don't even feel like the sort of emphasis on middle grade and young adult was really all that necessary. It just seemed like some general good stuff. What I did like about this book was that she kind of framed it as this is a book with advice to use for revisions. And a lot of the sort of exercises she kind of suggested were to look at a finished product because she's an editor. So she's putting that look of her advice of seeing a finished product and how to change it from there. And I like that kind of in-depth more revision in what to do with your project and looking at your project and putting it through these sort of checklists and these sort of exercises. And that's kind of my writing process, just my personal process, because I'm more of a pantser. I pants first, revise later. So I appreciated that kind of tone and aspect to this, the sort of take of more revising than anything else. I think that's actually where I'm going to end up using this in the future, is when I'm revising. That's where I will be revisiting some of these segments and some of the exercises. But there wasn't that much like standout, mind-blowing, changing information like with some of the other craft books I read. I know this review is going to be kind of all over the place just because I don't have that many sort of strong divisive opinions about this one as I did with some of the other craft books I've read. One thing I did like is there is a lot of organized sort of lists, bullet points, exercises. I always really appreciate that in a craft book. I've come to learn that's what I want in a craft book. That being said, some of the sections I wish were a little more organized. Like when I look into the contents for reusing this now, I don't know, it's not always that easy for me to find what she's talking about just because she does this sort of like clarity and connection, experience and emotion, like interest and change. Like I just want to know exactly what I'm getting. Hey, where's the thing about, you know, the plot thing or the blah blah blah. Like I want to be able to find it directly what I'm looking for in the contents. But overall, Cheryl had a very sort of warm, inviting way of writing that felt very supportive. Like not like some craft books are very pragmatic and kind of like, this is the way to do it. She was like, yeah, you can try this, you can try this. All writers have different processes. She also gave a lot of sort of links to resources and pointing out different resources, which again is great. I do wonder again if some of that stuff would be outdated in the future when she's like referencing blog posts or sites or things like that. That's kind of one of my fears about this book, is that it kind of feels some things are dated. I heard them say on the live show that this was actually started out as a mix of blog posts and a previously self-published book, and then kind of got bound into this version. So I'm not sure what came from where in that whole process. And I also am pretty sure that Kevin said his partner had used this in his writing course for university. So I found that kind of interesting, because sometimes it did very much feel like a textbook at certain areas, especially later in the book. At the beginning, I was kind of like, oh, this is just a nice, very supportive, fun read talking about writing. But as it got into it, it did kind of give me some textbook vibes. Some of my favorite sections and things that I did learn from this book was the section on character voice. I thought was really well done, where she kind of really sort of dissected character voice and different ways to look and sort of get a great strong voice for your character. Because a lot of people say like, oh, voice in writing is like, you know, you have it or you don't have it. But Cheryl kind of broke it down in a way that it's kind of like, no, there is some rhyme or reason to it, and it is something you can work on. And I liked that. She did have a few of her own sort of terms and lingo, not as much as I would say something like Save the Cat had, but the one that kind of stuck out for me, that when she was talking about different sort of plots, was this term a lack plot, because she was talking about sort of stories, the different type of plots a story can have and where the plot is being driven. Like I think the examples were conflict plot, mystery plot, and then a lack plot. And she described a lack plot being as your character is lacking something, and so the plot is them sort of trying to become emotionally whole in that way. And I think a lot of my writing falls into that, and so many other writing advice kind of says like, oh no, you need like this external plot, you need like all these things. And it was, again, something very validating in a way that she kind of was like, hey, with a lack plot, this is how you have to do. And it's like, I've always known these stories exist, and I know that that's where my writing leans towards. So it was just great, her kind of discussing that, for me at least. I think that was something that was helpful for me in this book. Another section of this book, which I found unique and very cool, was she had sort of an editor's annotation section in the back where she sort of had a text and she went through and she annotated it and kind of said, hey, this is why this mistake was made and this is why this was marked, and then afterwards showed the sort of fixed version of the text. And that's like such a great resource to see that from an editor's point of view. I kind of just skimmed over it at the time, but I definitely see myself going back and deep diving that when I'm doing my own edits of my work. I think that could be really useful. I also would like to revisit some of the exercises in here. I did a few of them, but there's just so many, and because the book was so thick, if I would have done the exercises as I would have gone along, it would have taken me a really long time to read the book. Okay, so I'm gonna now talk about my few sort of issues I had with the books, or the few kind of cons. So there's this section where she's talking about sort of having fresh ideas and fresh stories that sort of grab an editor's attention. And this kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So think differently. Make your manuscript stand out. Show us someone we haven't seen before, a voice we haven't heard, a story we don't know. And then she uses a section from one of the stories she edited that she uses a lot about an autistic boy. And I immediately was rubbed the wrong way, kind of saying like, hey, show us something fresh that we haven't seen before. And then to use autism as an example was like, that I think a lot of people could take that advice the wrong way. And then she kind of goes on to say, you know, like, oh, look at how his voice and way of seeing the world is so different, you know, and I haven't seen something like this before. You don't see a lot of this in YA. And I was like livid reading this. Like I was, it was like the moment I thought I wasn't going to finish the book. We were that far into the book and I thought, I'm done with this. But little did I know there was going to be then this whole section on sort of writing outside your experience. And that also was kind of a divisive section, I would say, just because some of the stuff in there, of course, was great. And Cheryl was very self-aware, being like, hey, I'm like upper middle class, middle-aged white lady, so I know that I'm not the one to speak on this. But at the same time, she still was speaking on it, and I don't know. Some of it was really some things were good and some things were bad here, because I think the advice for writing secondary characters was good, but and that kind of what we talked about in the live chat as well. She really should have just said straight up, don't write characters outside your experience as your main protagonist, or as your main plot line shouldn't be about the struggles of somebody who doesn't have your experience. And she never came straight out and said that. And I think somebody said in the live show that the example she kept using about the autism story, that the author of that was not on the spectrum. I'm not sure, I didn't check that one, but I don't know, it was weird. And maybe part of it is a sign of the times, because part of me is like, wow, it's cool that she was having this conversation in 2016 and bringing this up, and we need to be having these conversations, but at the same time, some of the advice that was in there I think could be harmful if people take it the wrong way. Yeah, that's a heavy section, and again, maybe I'm not the person to speak on this either, so I don't know. Again, it just kind of left a weird taste in my mouth, and it was a really big section of the book that she went in and talked about that, and I don't know, it just, and to me just felt weird and hypocritical because of that thing where she said, oh, write fresh, cool things, and then use autism as the example. That really rubbed me the wrong way. So that was the kind of the stain on the book for me, in my opinion, what I didn't like. One other little weak spot in there for me was the examples. She referenced a lot of the stories that she had edited, and they weren't really stories that I had heard of, and they weren't really helping me. When it's a story that I don't care about, I haven't heard about, and she had to include huge sections of the story that we could be kind of informed on what it was. And it's like, if you have to include a big section on it to use it as an example so we know what it is, was it the right choice as an example? I understand that it's probably easier for her to use her own stuff that she's edited and worked on. And on one hand, that's kind of cool, but on the other hand, there needed to be a few more mainstream examples, more mainstream current examples in there. So that's kind of how I feel about this one. Would I recommend picking it up? Yeah, there's some good things in there. It's not terrible. It wasn't mind-changing for me. In my honest opinion, a lot of the stuff in here, I kind of had already gotten from Story Genius, or from To Save the Cat, or just other general writing information I had. Also, I feel like Alexa Dunn's videos here on YouTube are kind of the go-to for YA, and that's more updated and evergreen and ever-changing, just because of the format of watching a YouTube video where you can be constantly upgrading it and releasing new information, where this is printed and it is there and set in stone, where the advice gets dated quite quickly. So even though I think a lot of the stuff in here, if I hadn't followed Alexa on YouTube and known her videos, I would have been learning for the first time. But just because we have that kind of great resource here, and other traditionally published authors like Michelle Schusterman giving great middle grade stuff, I find I learn a lot more from their YouTube channels in regards to YA and middle grade than I did from this. But it was good. It wasn't a bad one. There is a lot in there. You get your bang for your buck when it comes to size and exercises and a very wide span of information. So I would say you can take it or leave it. It's an okay one. It's not great. It's not terrible. And that's what it is. So I think I will be referencing it a little bit when I get into revisions and visiting some of the exercises in there again. I plan to be reading a lot of craft books this year and doing reviews on them, so if you want to catch those, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate that. It helps me grow over here. And I will catch you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!